In this video lecture, I'll walk you through how to download Mint and how to create a virtual machine and how to install the Linux ISO you downloaded to your virtual machine. So we'll download Mint from this page right here. And we can scroll down. Notice this says Linux Mint 17.3 Rosa. And these things change every few months. So if you look at this video, if you view this video and this says it's Linux Mint 18 or 19 or 20, it really doesn't matter. Don't download an older version. Just download whatever is in here on this page because it will always have the most recent version. And then we have several different, I would say versions, or actually editions of Linux Mint. Under the hood, they all work the same. The only differences between these is the interface, and some of these are very, for example, lightweight interfaces. If you don't have, let's say you have a little notebook or something like that you'd like to run that doesn't have many resources, for example, 2 gigabytes of RAM. And so you can download any of these. What I would suggest would be either Cinnamon or Mate, as you see here. You really don't need the multimedia support over here, so if you don't think you can be running videos, and actually when you're watching these videos, you shouldn't be looking at them within the virtual machine and within Linux. You should be doing it on your desktop and then have your virtual machine devoted just to running the commands. So, but regardless, you can download any of these in here. And whether you want to download 32 or 64-bit is determined by the bit depth of your host machine. So if you have a computer and you've installed Windows 10 64-bit, then you can download either of these. But if you have a 32-bit machine, you can only download the 32-bit. So your 64-bit operating system is backward compatible with 32-bit, but not vice versa. Okay? So you select one of these and you download that. So once it's downloaded, you can go to your VMware workstation, and we'll select New Virtual Machine. We can use Typical or Recommended. Recommended is a little easier. Custom kind of walks you through more detailed specifications of what you want to do, but for this instance, Typical is fine. Typical is fine. If you have a DVD, you can install it from this, but we've already downloaded the ISO right here. And actually, that's not the correct ISO, so we'll need to browse for it. And we will go up to Virtual Machines, and there's our Linux Mint here. Now, don't get worried if it says could not detect which operating system is in the disk image. The reason they do this is because they have easy installs which pretty much takes all the guesswork out of the installation process for some versions of Linux, including Ubuntu and Red Hat and some of the others. So we're all fine right here. We just selected that. We'll just have to indicate a few more pieces of information. For example, what are you trying to install? Well, we're trying to install Linux. What version is it? Well, I don't think they're going to have Mint in here. We're not. And so we can just go down and select, we can select Ubuntu 64-bit, because as I've indicated previously, I believe I have, is that Mint is a grandchild or a child of Ubuntu, and Ubuntu is a child of Debian. So it's Debian, Ubuntu, and Mint. So they're all built upon the same base as Debian. So we can change the name to Mint 17 or whatever you want. Notice where it's going to save it. Make sure you save it in the place where you can find it. And I always save mine under the Virtual Machines directory. Now, the newer versions of Mint require a little more space than the previous versions. And usually for Linux, So the new versions of Mint require just a little more space than the previous versions. Now it requires, I think, 9.2 gigabytes. The default for versions of Linux is the 20 gigabytes you see here. If you have enough space, that's fine, but you're probably going to be wasting a lot of space. So you can bump this down to something like 12, or maybe even try 10. That should work. We're going to keep this as split virtual disk into multiple files. Essentially what that's saying is that it only grows the hard drive when it needs the space. So it will create multiple smaller disks files to hold more information. If you select this right here, it's going to create one big honking 12 gigabyte file from the outset. So we'll leave that at split virtual machines. Now we can go back and check our work here. It's Mint 17. This is where it's going to be saved. And this is all correct. Notice this is 12 gigabytes, so that should be sufficient. And to split drives, the memory is 1024. We can change all this, and we'll look at that in a second. And network adapter is set for network address translation. If we wanted to change any of this, we click that button there, and notice that we can change anything in here. Let's say you've only got 4 gigabytes, or let's say, 4 gigabytes of RAM. I believe I have 16, so I'm setting mine at a gigabyte of RAM. But if you didn't have that much, you could drop that to 512 or something like that and see if it works fine. And it should. It might run a little slower, maybe not that much slower, but the more RAM, the better. Number of processors, you may have more than one processor or core, but we can keep it at this. If you'd like to play around with this, that's fine. But just realize if something goes wrong, you may want to go back and reset these to 1. Notice that we are using the ISO as we would a physical CD or DVD drive, and we want to keep this as it is. After we install, we can go back and we can click this button right there and set that to use the physical drive if we want. Network adapter, connected power on, we always want that. And you have several choices over here as to what type of network connection you want. Bridged means that you're connected directly to the physical network. That is, you're going to be using the same exact IP address as your host. Net usually works well because what that's going to do is that's going to parse out a private address to you. So your host is kind of working as your router, and so that's the outward facing IP address. Your internal IP address will be something in a class A, B, or C private address space. So typically that's going to be a private class C address like 192.168.something.something. So we'll keep that there because that works just fine. All the rest of this stuff is set automatically and should work just fine, except this thing right here. You might, if you don't have Accelerate 3D graphics set, you might end up with something that looks like this, running in software rendering mode. And that's not an error, that's just saying, hey, you're going to be running a little slower because you don't have a 3D acceleration set. So the way to get around that is to go in, if that's not set, is to set that, and then you should be okay. So we'll click close and we'll click finish. And then we can click the run button. So notice this says 17.3 down here. Here's our icon that says install Linux Mint. Let's try that. Install a super user. We are the equivalent of running as admin since we're installing it, or as root under Linux. So that's what it means by super user. You can select English here if that's what you want. If you select something else, realize you'll get that language. Notice this says at least 9.6 gigabytes available for drive space and is connected to the internet. We have both, so we can select continue. Warning, this will delete any files in the disk, erase disk, and install Linux Mint. Well, that's what we want. There's some other things down here that are a little more complicated, so we're going to skip these right now, but you can encrypt your installation or use logical volume management, which actually occurs automatically when you click this. Okay, so it asks you here about the specifics. It's a SCSI drive, 000 SDA, the S standing for SCSI, as we'll learn later on. It's creating two partitions, a primary partition with an ext4 formatted, which doesn't really mean anything to you. It's like it's a different file system, and it's a Linux file system. It's used by most Linux distributions, and it's going to create a swap file. So we'll click continue. And this is quite a lengthy process. So some of the things, when it's going to take a little bit, I will pause the video so you don't have to watch it all. That's the correct time zone for us, New York, Eastern Time. The keyboard layout, English and English. Click continue. My name, your computer's name, I want it to be called Mint17. Pick a username. I always pick the same one since I've got hundreds of these things, or I've had hundreds in the past. And I'm also very careful, and I choose a password that I can remember, because if you forget your password, you're pretty much hosed. So I would suggest making sure that you write down your password or you remember it. And this isn't true of your host machine. You know what this is running on. You always want a strong password. But for these kinds of things, since I use so many, I create one that I remember. Or you could log in automatically if you want. I'm going to choose login automatically, and then just not keep anything of importance on it. And now it's copying the files. And I'm going to pause the video because it's going to take a while to do this. And if there are any substantive changes on the screen, I'll start the video back. If we read down here at the bottom, it's talking about something with VMware tools. It says enables many features and improves the mouse movement, video, and performance. And we don't want to install it right now. We want to wait till everything, the operating system is installed, and then we can go back in and install VMware tools. Interestingly enough, it allows you to drag and drop between your VM and your host desktop, which is pretty cool. So if you want to copy something off to your host, you can do that. If you're installing Ubuntu or Fedora or Red Hat, it installs VMware tools automatically, as well as if you're installing any versions of Windows. And for some reason, unfortunately, it doesn't automatically install them when we're installing Mint, and there's several others, Linux distributions, where it doesn't install it automatically. But it's not rocket science. Okay, I'm going to pause the video. You'll see the updates down here, retrieving files. Okay, once it says installing language packs, you can skip this. And you'll see something like this. You don't need those language packs. Come on, skip this. Oh, unless you want to use Spanish or French or German or Cherokee or whatever. And it says, forget you, buddy, I'm going to install them anyway. Usually it allows you to skip those. So now it's configuring the hardware. And we're almost done. So now it's creating the bootloader. And now it's downloading some things from the repository. It's continuing to install the system. And we're done. Cool. So now we can go ahead and we can restart. So now it should start up from the hard drive. Okay, please remove the installation media and close the tray. And then press enter. We're just going to gain focus and press enter. Because what we'll need to do is we'll need to shut down the system in order to switch this back over to the physical drive. But first we'll install VMware tools. All right, so we've installed Linux Mint 17.3 ROSA. Just to give you a little information on things that you can find in here on the system. We really don't need all that stuff, so we'll stop this right here. Okay, so again at the bottom it says install tools, and we can do that from either up here, install VMware tools, or down here. So we'll select that down there. We can close that. So what VMware Tools does is it improves the performance of VMware with respect to the display, the mouse, the keyboard, and also to drag and drop from your host system to your virtual machine. So actually, I've never run it this way. I just don't go in and click on this stuff. And you could try it if you want, but this is the way that I run it. Notice that it's mounted right here. If you want to get back to it, you can do that. And I will go to the command line, and then I'm going to go to the desktop. Sorry. See, this is actually what I do. I take this, take the VMware Tools, this compressed archive file, and I copy this here. And then I close this. And then you're on the desktop, and you can see that it's right there. And then you can unarchive this xbfc VMware Tools. Okay, and then notice that it's got a new folder directory right here, so we want to go there. Let me clear that, and you can look at the contents. Notice it says VMware install. So let's see what's on here. Let's look at the install file. And this tells you how to install it. Notice that it says the file to run right here. If you're installing it for the first time, you can just keep hitting enter each time you're prompted to select the factory default. And so that's usually what I do. And a lot more information down here. Okay, so sudo.vmware install.pl. That's the first time I've seen that message. Yeah, we want to say yes. And then we can just keep hitting enter. And you can read these on your own, but these are default factory settings for the location of these files. You know, I never want to change those. And so right now it's not giving us that prompt back. That means it's doing something. Just be patient. And then you'll see it'll start compiling some stuff. Notice here there's talking about the VMware host guest file system that allows for shared folders. This is a great way to share folders between your host and your VM. And we definitely want this. So in order for that to work, we need to make sure that we install VMware Tools. And we'll set that up after we get all this stuff running. Change that. No, that's the compiler. The headers. And now it starts compiling. And we just keep hitting the return key. And that's it. Okay, so notice it was talking about drag and drop between the host and guest. You'll need to essentially what you really need to do is to restart your X session, which just means that you need to reboot. Okay. Notice that VMware Tools was mounted on dev SR0. SR0 is your CD-ROM. And so now we can go back up And we can remove these files. NRM. Here we go. Okay, so if we go back up to VM, notice that it no longer says install tools, it says reinstall. Well, that's because it's already installed, okay? We can go to settings, and let's change this since we no longer need that. We'll select the use physical drive, and then we'll go to options and shared folders. This allows you to create a shared folder that you can use between your host and VM. We select always enabled, we click add, and we get this little dialog box that allows us to now select the folder that we want to share. And I want to go to virtual machines, and there's my shared folder. Okay. And then it'll be named shared on the virtual machine. Enable this feature, finish, and we can click OK. And now there's one more thing that I suggest you do. No, I require you to do this. Let's go in and let's create a snapshot. Take a snapshot. So what a snapshot does is it lets you preserve the state of the virtual machine so you can return to it later. Why would you want to do that? Well, think of it like an insurance policy. If you go in and you screw something up and you can't recover, you can go back in and select one of these snapshots and it will take you back to that good known state. So let's take a snapshot. Notice down here in the left-hand corner, it's saving the state. Let me pause the video because it's taking a while. And we're done there. And we can close that. And so, notice if we go to VM snapshot, this is our snapshot manager, so we can revert to, this says revert to snapshot 1, and that's the only snapshot we have. And so on occasion, you can go in, and if you've worked a couple of weeks on your classes, you can go back in and take another snapshot so you don't lose your work. And also it's a good idea to back up any work you have anyway, for example to the shared folder, and even back that up to an external hard drive. So let's restart. We're going to quit and we're going to restart. Okay, and remember that the reason I didn't receive the authentication dialog for my credentials is that I allowed myself to be logged in automatically. Again, that's not a very good thing to do, but I'm just doing this for teaching purposes. So let's see if this drag and drop between the host system and the VM works. So here's a little file right here that's 3K. I'm going to grab that and pull this over. Boom, there it is. And of course, if you want to copy this back, you just take this and copy it back over let's go here, and I'll show you how that works. Just take it, copy it back over, and there it showed up. Okay, the last thing we can look at is looking at the notice, look, there's our shared folder. We're going to CD to the shared folder. And those are the files that are on my host system, but they're also shared with my VM, so I can keep all of my shared files in that folder. It's mount HDFS and then whatever you called it, and I called it shared. Whoops, shared. Okay, so we started out by downloading our Linux Mint ISO. We created a virtual machine with at least 10 gigabytes of a hard drive, and we have an internet connection, and then we installed Linux Mint. Then we installed VMware Tools, which allows us to do all these cool things that we saw, including dragging and dropping and improved mouse performance. We created a snapshot, and then we created this shared folder. So hopefully this explains everything you've needed to know about how to get Mint up and running.